coming in. Before I start, I'll say welcome back to people and a big apology for this morning. You didn't hear what I had to say for 10 minutes, which is a bit embarrassing, but I'm glad the rest of the day worked for you. So I've been in and out of sessions, jumping in, listening to what you've been saying and obviously sharing with the team on the chat here. I just wanted to sum up, and I think this would be useful as well for Mr. Kelly to hear as well, because obviously he couldn't join us for the full event. And first of all, welcome him. So welcome to Sean Kelly. I'll introduce you formally a little bit later on. And I have Juliette here as well, who's going to wrap up at the end of this session too. So like I said, I've been jumping around the sessions today. So Mr. Kelly, we've had 4 parallel sessions looking at a number of different issues. We've been looking at regulation, the power of information and sharing. We've been looking at science, data, all kinds of things. Some key takeaways that I've taken away. What I haven't done is given you a summary of each session, because all the sessions are pre-recorded. So if you weren't able to attend one, then you can jump in. You'll get an email after the event showing you how to do that. The first one is very pertinent to Mr. Kelly. There's a sense and a view that today's regulation are just not set up to meet today's challenges. We're being very reactive and not proactive when it comes to building fire safety within our regulatory frameworks. Interestingly, somebody went so far to say, I think it was Guillermo who said, the way we build buildings, the world, modern buildings at least, the world over is the same. The law of physics is the same, yet our regulations are so different. So there's a lot we can learn from each other. There's probably a lot where we can align as well. Funding. We need more research funding to ensure that we keep up with the developments of the built environment. The way we build is changing dramatically and quickly. This is how we can become more proactive. Our, like many, environment is fragmented. Researchers and firefighters need to work closely together for researchers to better understand actual fires. Like we just said, they happen so fast, and the firefighters are often the people on the scene collecting all the data. So to better take advantage of the science behind fire, there needs to be more of a joined up community. We need to harmonize our data. We talk about data all the time. It's an eternal issue, but we need better quality and better reliability of our data. That's the job of the authorities, for sure, but it's also our job as a community. And as I said just earlier, it'd be good for us to be able to collect that on the scene. Unfortunately, we're having more fires. And particularly during lockdown, that was something that Peter Maas, a Brussels firefighter, pointed out. Lots of domestic fires, electrical domestic fires was mentioned as well. Awareness sharing is another panel session that we talked about, and lessons learnt. We've heard from some great initiatives in session 3 about sharing lessons learned, real-time lessons learned when it comes to fire safety. Private initiatives are just as important as public initiatives, because we can't wait for the regulators to do everything. So we in this community have a big role to play. Lots of talks about building resilience, about resilience in general. We talked about indexing fires, undertaking more risk assessments, so that we can better determine the fire safety of existing buildings. All of this could help us underpin a fire safety rating scheme for buildings, so actually having a label on the building to tell you how resilient that building is. And that's pretty much it. I'm not going to go into any of the details I said. Some key themes, some common themes. We talk about these issues a lot, and a lot to share with each other. We have 100 members of this community, Mr. Kelly, since 2018. Sorry, 800, more than 100, 800 members. I think we started at 100, we're at 800 today. Scientists, researchers, firefighters, students, companies, all of whom are trying to share their great knowledge. So in this community today, we had 200 people registered, and we want to go from strength to strength and hopefully help people like yourself who are regulating on fire safety, support you with your work. So I'm going to turn to you now. I'll just give you a brief introduction. Mr. Kelly has been a member of the European Parliament for Ireland since 2009. He's a member of Fine Gael, which is a part of the European People's Party, so the Christian Democrats. Among many of his hats, he's a member of the Committee on Industry, Research and Energy. And since his time, at the beginning of his time as an MEP, he's been a keen supporter of fire safety. And I just reminded Mr. Kelly that in 2014, when there was a younger version of myself knocking on his door, asking him to sign fire safety pledge. He was one of the first MEPs actually to sign a pledge on fire safety, and he did so again in 2019. So thank you very much for your continued support. Mr. Kelly has been appointed the rapporteur, so the main man, if you like, on the European Commission's revision of the European Buildings Directive. And we're expecting that from the European Commission in December this year. And at that point, it will be handed to the European Parliament, and Mr. Kelly will be leading the work on that. Last time around, we had a provision for fire safety in the Buildings Directive, where member states were invited to ensure that fire safety was taken into account during major renovations and in their long-term renovation strategy. They're not doing brilliantly, as I understand it, but Mr. Kelly can maybe talk about that. So now we have a great opportunity to strengthen that piece of legislation even further. So I'd like to share the floor with Mr. Kelly, or the screen, and let him explain to us how that's going to happen. Mr. Kelly, over to you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sian and Juliet, and hello everybody. Delighted to be with you, and thank you very much to Fire Safety Europe for asking me to contribute to today's discussion. And it's a great privilege to so do, because this topic is of major importance. In fact, I got a bit of a shock there when I heard you saying that fires are actually increasing rather than decreasing. So we really need to get our act together. Climate change and environmental degradation are an existential threat to Europe and the world. Extreme weather conditions will increase the likelihood and risk of natural disasters, but also accidents such as fires. The Fit for 55 package proposed by the European Commission is the largest single batch of legislation to tackle climate change proposed by any government anywhere in the world. It is designed to update EU laws to meet the new 2030 emissions reduction target of 55% below 1990 levels, which is a tall order and very challenging. Indeed, to use Mr. Timmermans' words, when you look for it in Parliament, he said it will be damn hard to achieve, even though some people want to just go beyond 55. So anyway, as this is such a vast and detailed release of legislation, the Parliament will have its work cut out. But the sense of urgency now, with the devastating effects of climate change plain to see, means that we have an opportunity to push for real ambition with the practical steps needed to achieve it. And we would hope to see that in COP26 in particular. If this is successful, it will make the EU the world's first real mover on achieving net zero emissions. I believe this is not just in our planetary interest, but also in our strategic interest, as it will introduce resilience into the long-term futures of our economies. This ambitious decarbonisation strategy will target all sectors of the economy and international trade. Buildings are indispensable for reaching the EU's carbon neutrality, energy efficiency, and renewable energy objectives. Reaching our climate targets without decarbonising our living and working spaces simply cannot be done. Buildings are responsible for 36% of greenhouse gas emissions, which I'm sure you know at this stage, and 40% of energy consumption in the EU. Yet in today's Europe, 75% of buildings are not energy efficient, mostly because many of the buildings in use today were constructed before the current requirements were put in place. The Energy Performance of Buildings Directive is the main EU-level legal instrument for decarbonising member states' building stock. Since its adoption, the EPBD has been closely connected with the EU climate targets and has been aligned to reflect their progressive evolution. The renovation of the used building stock is a key Green Deal priority. This is due not only to the potential reduction of CO2 emissions, but also as a driver for sustainable growth and job creation. For example, the construction sector is the largest generator of jobs per million euros invested. With goals to renovate 35 million buildings, a lot of buildings, 35 million buildings by 2030, supported with the funding of €672.5 billion from the Recovery and Resilience Facility, this provides massive economic opportunities as well as challenges. As Rapporteur for the Implementation Report on the EPBD, it has been made abundantly clear to me that without significant increases in renovation rates, we will miss an opportunity to create millions of jobs, but also, more importantly, we will fail the next generation who will have to deal with the consequences of our inaction. Energy efficiency and performance is, of course, pivotal, but there are numerous other social and economic benefits stemming from innovations. Health and safety should also be a core focus. Innovations and standards for new builds should address fire safety and risks related to intense seismic activity. As approximately 50% of domestic accidental fires have an electric source, Member States should look to develop electrical inspection regimes and ensure innovations that integrate electrical safety checks and sufficient ventilation for smoke in case of fire. This is of paramount importance. The long-term renovation strategies by each Member State should also contribute to the static and structural reinforcement of the building stock. We have seen the devastation caused by earthquakes and fire, but we do have the power to greatly reduce the risk of danger and ensure a build stock that is not only a positive factor in the fight against climate change, but more resilient to the effects of it. The current EPPD ensures that Member States are required to address fire safety issues, both in buildings undergoing renovations and in their long-term renovation strategies. These provisions are an important example of how we can include key inclusions in European legislation that can be effective in making a contribution to the safety of our buildings across the Union. The safety of our citizens must always be a priority. Energy efficient buildings must also be fire safe. Some years have passed, but the lessons learned from the Grenfell Tower tragedy in 2017 must stay fresh in our minds, starkly highlighting the vital importance of high fire safety standards and ensuring buildings are constructed in a way that guarantees the safety of their occupants. Every day, there are around 5,000 fire incidents in the European Union. And while the competence for this issue is a national one, we cannot ignore the fact that the products that are used in the construction of our buildings are mostly pan-EU products. Certain efforts and policy actions at EU level, therefore, are necessary to ensure that we cooperate in tackling this issue. There are, of course, certain policies in place to ensure the safety of our buildings, but there is more room for improvement in many aspects. Even such as today's are very helpful in this regard, especially an event like we're having now that's hugely important, as it brings together some key experts that can advise on the improvements we as policymakers need to make at EU level to close policy gaps and ensure effective controls are implemented. I've mentioned this in the past, but I still believe there is a need for a new EU fire safety strategy, which would consist of a number of coherent policy actions across all relevant pieces of legislation. This could include an effective testing mechanism for buildings, facades, new requirements to test the toxicity of smoke from construction products under fire, accompanied with the appropriate labelling and strengthened efforts to ensure that fire safety regulations are applied by industry and enforced by the relevant public authorities. Lastly, although legislation is incredibly important in this area, permits, technical inspections, and law enforcement alone cannot achieve safety improvement. In practice, we can see that to improve safety, we need to focus directly on the awareness of people. Fire safety awareness certainly belongs to the most important fire safety improvement measures. Why? Because it is extremely important for people to be aware of their own responsibility and the impact they have on fire safety. If people act fire safe, the likelihood of a fire breaking out is reduced. And if people know what to do when a fire breaks out, the likelihood of casualties is reduced. To conclude, I thank you again for the opportunity to speak here this afternoon. I look forward to continued collaboration with Fire Safe Europe, and I hope that we will be able to effectively implement the outcomes and recommendations from this week's discussions, because we are talking about saving lives and saving buildings in due course. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Thank you very much indeed. You've touched on so many things here. There are hands clapping. Unfortunately, we can't hear it, but there are hands clapping, and there were thumbs up during your speech at various different points. Maya says, great message. We've got a couple of questions, but there's one question that's come up here from Quentin de Hult. Something I don't know so much about, so forgive me if I'm paraphrasing Quentin, but you mentioned it, so I think it's important around electrical inspections. Do you see good support in the European Parliament to encourage, I can imagine, mandatory inspection of electrical installations to prevent fire within the new EPBD? So what do you think the opportunities are with the new PBD for us to get some kind of mandatory measures in there, if you like, within the long-term renovation strategies, for example, around electrical installations?
I think it's probably a once-off opportunity. If we don't avail of it now, it is unlikely that we will be having another EPFB into the future. So if we don't incorporate these important issues now, we never will. Secondly, with the massive amount of new buildings, number one, but also retrofitting, it is far easier and more cost effective to include measures like this than trying to be doing them subsequently. And we, in the assessing the long-term renovation strategies by the member states, weren't entirely happy with many aspects of them. And one of the things we've asked the Commission to do, and I think they're going to do it, is to come up with a template, which is a kind of a guide for the member states. So there will be consistency across the board. So the points about which you will be mentioning today in your report in relation to fire safety can be incorporated. And above all, where you talk about materials which are going to be used in buildings, especially in retrofitting buildings, that they are fire safe, because they can vary enormously. And I think that's the point that I would hope to would come across. And that would make a huge difference, because then you would have more efficient houses, more comfortable houses, and more safe houses. So they're the three things. Okay. Efficient in terms of energy, comfort in terms of people's health, and safety, which is the most important thing of all, because things can go askew very quickly. And we may need also, as a follow-up in the implementation, to take the last point I made, to create awareness. It's an opportunity as well, I think, to create awareness across Europe by having some type of meetings or hearings or discussions, again, to look at that whole aspect of it, because you can have everything in place, but if people aren't aware of it, then of course, and particularly if they're not aware of what to do when a fire goes out or takes place, then that's going to be very important. So we have an opportunity to regulation, and of course, which you mentioned earlier on, that question of research, continuous research is going to be key as well. And you also mentioned data, which I think is important, and possibly labelling. That whole question of labelling was something I think we have to look at as well, because it is one thing to have a label for energy efficiency. Is it possible to have the same labelling for fire safety? And we should, it's an opportunity now. I think it's once in a generation opportunity to incorporate these things now, and to make a huge difference, because the regulation that we will pass will basically form the basis of the standards, especially the minimum standards that will be required. So the better we make it, the better it will be for everybody.
Yeah, I think the fact is that there's never too much information in this space, particularly for firefighters who are being called on scene, and often they don't know what's behind the walls. So labels, that's something we've heard in the past from firefighters in particular. You know, many modern buildings are built to look old, so it would help enormously for them to know, you know, what they're dealing with when they're able to turn up on the scene. You talked about creating awareness, and because you've answered my other two questions, so I'm not going to ask those. I was going to ask you, do you think we're doing enough at an EU level, and what you think you can do on the PPD? Just on awareness here, you know, obviously the European Parliament's the only democratically elected body in the EU, probably closest to the European citizens. What can we do together? So, you know, science, firefighters, companies, politicians like yourself, to increase awareness. How can we work together more closely, particularly now?
I would like to see, firstly, some research done into the level of awareness amongst people regarding fire safety and what to do in the event of a fire, and what to look out for and what not to look out for. And then we could have some hearings here in Parliament, specifically looking at the results of that research and where we need to improve matters, and then come up with a strategy how we could improve it without complicating matters too much. But I think it would be useful, because it is one of those things that people will never go looking for probably themselves, but once they have the opportunity and get information, they're very pleased to have it. And someday during their lives, that opportunity is going to come, where they will be met with, whether it's a fire in a grill or whatever, how to handle it properly and how to do it. So we have to look at the small things as well as the big things. Sure. And I think, again, exchanging information, best practice, and having some type of a dedicated moment or day or whatever to this issue, I think would be very important.
Would you support a European Fire Safety Awareness Day at European level? We have lots of international days for things. Do you think that would be a good idea?
I think it would be a very good idea. And again, of course, the problem with these days is that we have maybe too many, but at the same time, each of them will have an effect. And I think a lot of it would be to build up towards it, to have events planned, let people be aware of them, rather than waiting for the day itself, which you often see today is, and sometimes you might be nearly going to bed at night and you come across something. Today is the day for whatever it is, and then it's kind of forgotten. So it's the build up to the day that's the important thing, and then to have actions either leading up to the day or on the day, and possibly some type of a follow through afterwards. But it's a very good idea, because especially something that's so important to people's lives, they all get it. They don't think about it too often, but they get it, and they would appreciate, I think, that type of a focus for 1 day or 2 days. And then you could also possibly, I think, utilize schools, especially, to just on that particular day to do something in relation to fire safety, because schools are powerful vehicles. Yeah. I mean, when I look at climate change now, in fairness, all the recycling and a lot of the awareness that young people have has come from programs that were done in schools. You know, what they call blue flags, flags turn green flags.
Yeah.
And all that builds up enormously. But in this area, fire safety haven't really made center stage. And we should try and do it without putting too much burdens or too many burdens on the teachers, etc. So, but it's certainly something I think that we could avail of.
Great, thank you. There are a couple of questions in the chat, but I'm afraid we're running out of time. We've only got 2 more minutes left before we have to hand over to Juliette. Somebody's asked about timber frame construction, a lot about timber construction in the press at the moment. And I won't advocate one technology or another, that's not my role, but I think it's Russ, is asking, will the EU embrace timber construction moving forward as a solution to, imagine, delivering our decarbonisation and climate goals? Have you got any views on that? Is it something that you know much about?
Actually, I have seen it becoming more and more discussed here in Europe, and it makes a lot of sense, and particularly also in relation to what they call sustainable forests, etc. And indeed, in terms of materials as well that are safer and better, I think that you'll find there'll be a bigger emphasis on all types of wood and timber in buildings, because they have an awful lot to offer. And really, I think they're only beginning to come into their own now. And you'll find that, again, I think young people, as they grow up until their 20s and 30s and are looking for houses themselves or building houses, this is going to be a real option for them. And I would say in most member states, there will be an opportunity for those who construct mainly from wood or timber, will have a niche market. And I think they can grow a lot into the future. And we can incorporate all those positive points into it as well, which will be very important.
Thank you. We have some great comments in the chat. What I'm going to ask the team to do is export them somehow and make sure that Mr. Kelly gets hold of those after the event today, so that he can read all of the great comments from people here and access the various different links as well. Thank you ever so much for taking the time to speak to us today, Mr. Kelly. We wish you all the best. I know what it's like to take on a massive legislative dossier like this. It's going to be a hectic few months for you, full speed. If you want any help from anyone here, you know where to find us. And like I said, we'll try and share as much as possible the comments that we got today and any of the studies, the videos, so that you can tap into that at your leisure, and hopefully it can help you with the new report.
Thank you very much, Shane, and
thank you.
You'll be welcome to come knocking on my door again if you want to.
No.
It's 6 floors higher now than it used to be. It's on the 14th floor now.
Oh, is it? We've moved up in the world. Excellent. Excellent.
Thank you very much. Thanks to Juliet and everybody. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. So that's my job done. I'm going to hand over to Juliette now, because actually I have to leave you. I'm glad everyone could hear me a second time. Thanks everybody for your time today. Juliette's going to close the event, and hope everybody's enjoyed themselves. Juliette, it's over to you.
Yes. So I'm checking my micro. Can you hear me, Michelle?
Yes.
Cool.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye. So I have the difficult task to close this event. We had a wonderful day. Today, you've seen and heard a lot of examples of people who care for fire safety, not only in the lobby, but in the parallel session. So I will invite you to come back, because there were a lot of material and videos provided in the booth, in the lobby. So the content of this event is really dense. Now I would like to take to look towards the future. After this event, what will shape your work over the next 10 years? I would like to ask you to take a comfortable position, close your eyes, breathe, and imagine what this future could be. Really dream big. You are in your new office, new job, or at a conference in 10 years' time, or in your lab. What can we see? For me, when I started working at FSU, we dreamed about the fire safety labeling of building, like NCAP stands for car safety. And every time we were meeting with members at dinners, we were discussing this labeling, how it will look like, how we will want it to have QR codes outside. Well, and then we launched the idea 2 years ago. It's a difficult project, but when I look into the future, definitely there is a fire safety rating scheme that will help people understand the level of fire safety they can expect when renting or buying real estate, or simply booking an hotel room. What else can we dream of? I see that the EU Green Deal, with the policies and the investment plans, increased the fire safety of the EU building stocks. Regulators have taken the opportunity to improve the fire safety of our buildings while increasing their energy performance. Yes, they did it. And fire safety requirements for renovations are now included in all long-term renovation strategy in every EU country. Let's dream bigger. Well, then I see that fire safety is no longer a bonus of the building policies, but is one of the main objectives. Buildings are made more resilience by construction materials or systems, and buildings remain structurally sound after a fire. Current fire safety issue with high-rise residential building, kindergarten, schools, hospitals are all solved. And Mr. Kelly is having an even bigger dream than myself. He sees a new European fire safety strategy. I see it too. And you can put it in the chat if you see it too. So that's what I see. Some of the biggest achievements of Fire Safe Europe were really wild dreams a decade ago, and now they are a reality. Given the momentum our European fire safety community has built, I'm confident that you will achieve this new world of fire safety, that fire experts from all over the world will work to develop and implement the fire safety rating scheme, that regulators will include fire safety requirements for renovations in all long-term renovation strategies, and that there will be a new European fire safety strategy. That's all my dreams. This summit is a very special event for me, as it is, after 8 years, my last event as Managing Director of FSU Secretariat. I would like to say kudos to the FSU family for a very enriching time in my professional life. Leading this inspiring association, I learned a lot. I've been blessed to have a very supportive members and board. We say that behind every great man, there is a great woman. The reverse is also true. I could not have done this job with 2 kids below 5 without the support of my partner, Laurent Rosenfeld, to whom I'm forever grateful. And finally, I want to take the time to say a special thanks to 5 women without whom FSU would not be where it is today. And I'm going to put it on the screen so everybody can see it. Sarah de Bischkirchen, Bianca Shirato, Birgit Messerschmidt, Sian Hughes, and Roberta Arbinolo. All of them have been really key to put Fire Safe Europe where it is. Girls, you rock! So I'm moving to France next year, and I'm very confident that my successor will take FSU to the next level. Thank you for your attention, and please dream big. Keep dreaming big. Let's get in the lobby to say goodbye properly, and I see you soon in 5 minutes in the lobby. Bye-bye.